everybody, welcome to the Chess Harbor. My name is Raf, and today I have another Road to Master game from the Club Chess Championship. In this game I was playing with the white pieces again, and I decided to play the move knight to f3. The Réti opening, something a little bit more slow. I wanted to play a kind of strategical game, kind of slowly squeeze my opponent. Move knight to f3 is very nice because it's very flexible. You can kind of see what black does and decide later what kind of setup you want to run. In general, I like to play with the fianchetto, so g3, bishop to g2, and then castles if black allows it, and then later decide if I want to go for the move d4, if I want to go for the move c4, and kind of see what black does to decide what kind of setup I want. So my opponent copies, plays knight to f6, g3, e6, bishop to g2, d5, so going for more kind of standard Queen's Gambit decline setup. Castles, bishop to d6, and now I have a choice. My opponent has chosen classical development. I can either play the move c4 immediately, so after c4, for example, castles, and now the move d4 would lead us to the mainline Catalan, but you can also go for a kind of Réti style approach with the move b3, and after, for example, c5, the move c takes, e takes, and then d4, which is very classical Réti. You have very good compensation. You're taking the pawn. You're playing against the isolated queen's pawn here. The bishop can easily fianchetto here, and you have very nice control over d4, which is strategically a nice position to have. But objectively, black should also be fine because with the half-open e file and the open c file, black has a nice compensation for having the isolated queen's pawn there. So it's really a strategic choice, but definitely not bad for black either. I decided in this game that I don't want to go for a kind of c4 setup. I decided to go for the move d4, just making sure that my opponent can't play the move e5 immediately. And after castles, c4. So we have reached a classical Catalan setup here. And my opponent chooses my opponent chooses the move c6, which is the closed Catalan. And here I like playing the move queen to c2. Queen to c2 is just kind of a waiting move. You're kind of seeing what black does while still putting the queen on a useful square. You're opening up the d1 square for a rook to go opposite of the queen if ever the game decides to open up. It's very nice. You're also just positioning the queen so it could recapture on c4 if it has to. And you're also just putting it on this light square diagonal, where often there is kind of tactics involving knight to g5. For example, here, if black takes on c4, you can take back with the queen immediately, or you could also play pawn to a4, which is also a very typical main line, stopping the move b5, later recapturing with the queen, or even going for recapturing with the knight. And it's a very strategical kind of slow position where you're really just squeezing and saying to black, what are you going to do about your bad light square bishop? But here, after queen to c2, my opponent played knight b to d7, just keeping things closed for now. And I like playing knight b to d2, with the idea of going for a quick e4. It's pretty much just unstoppable for black. Black can try to move e5 here, but after c takes d, you can play something like this. The position opens up again, and you're playing against the isolated queen's pawn again. And I personally like having white in this position. I think it's much easier to play for white than for black. But my opponent prepares the move e5 further with rook to e8. Now I'm first with the move pawn to e4, and here a move like pawn takes on c4 would already blunder a piece, so he can't do that. He has to take on e4. He does that with the knight. So to trade off a couple of pieces, knight takes on e4, knight takes on e4, pawn takes on e4, queen takes on e4. And here, this position is really mainline closed Catalan. Black has objectively a fine position, but I personally still like playing white. You have a very big space advantage in the center. Your pawns, they control a lot of squares here, and you have very nice strategical ideas here, and we'll see them very well in the game. My opponent here, the standard move would be something like knight to f6, for example, and both queen to c2 and queen to e2 are okay in this position. My opponent played a kind of a weird move here. He played knight to f8, And his idea becomes clear after the next move. I play rook to d8, as I mentioned, opposite of the queen, really preventing my opponent from going either c4 or e5, or c5 or e5. And my opponent here played move f5, which is super weakening. It hits the queen, it maybe prepares some kind of attacking chances, and I definitely understand why he plays knight to f8, but weakening his e6 pawn here is really crazy. So I play queen to e2, just making sure that e5 is not playable. And now knight to g6. I didn't really understand his setup all that well. I haven't really faced any kind of f5 as early as this in the closed Catalan, so I was a little bit flabbergasted by it as well. But I've really felt like white's position should be very dominant here. Bishop to g5, hitting the queen. My idea is I want to trade off this queen, so after bishop to e7, I'm very happy to chop off the queen, because trading all of these pieces, so if we get into a game where it's only these two bishops against each other, my bishop is going to be much better than his bishop. And if I can maybe even trade my bishop for his knight, my knight is going to be a ton better than his bishop as well. After trading dark square bishops, I have these two squares to work with, so that's strategically my idea. But my opponent plays queen to c7, and now another very typical idea in the closed Catalan is playing the move c5. C5, it looks very anti-positional at first. You're leaving this pawn backwards. For example, if black can double up on the e file, on the d file rather, and target my d4 pawn, things could go very bad. Also, his knight has some kind of monster outpost on d5, but it's okay because the pawn on c5 is very strong. The pawn on c5 takes control over these dark squares and makes sure that the move c5 can never be played from black's perspective, making this bishop permanently very strong, eyeing these two bad pawns. And at some point, if I can expand on the queen side playing b5, it's going to be over for black. So the move c5 is very strong. My opponent plays bishop to e7. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very happy to chop it off. Bishop takes, rook takes, and now knight to e5. If these knights go off, I'm very happy as well, because if I get a position like this, my rook is going to plant itself on the d file, and I'm just going to double up on the d file. I'm going to have total control. This bishop is really bad. But so my opponent doesn't trade the knights. He plays bishop to d7 instead. I definitely don't want to take that bishop, because if I take this bishop, yeah, I'm just taking his bad piece off the board. I definitely don't want to do that. Taking the knight here would be okay, but I had something else in mind. I played the move h4, just grabbing more space, making sure that some kind of kingside expansion in the future is really not possible, maybe even potentially threatening the move h5. Opponent plays rook to d8. And now the point of my move really was knight takes g6, h takes g6, and f4. So I'm stopping any kind of knight or any kind of g5 pushes here, really clamping down on the e5 pushes as well. So this pawn setup here is very sturdy. There's only one problem here, and that is the potentially weak backwards d pawn. But that can easily be solved. I could double my rooks here, and the d pawn is not going to be doing anything. If I can put my king on e3, the d pawn is not going to be weak at all, and I can just play this kind of slow queenside play, and I'm going to squeeze black to death. So black plays b5 here, which isn't really good of a move. I expected something like b6, but here white is also with a nice choice. You can play rook to c1, for example, b takes, rook takes. Everything is eyeing the c6 pawn. This is strategically winning for white. But what I would have played instead is move b4, for example, because if takes, again, everything is eyeing the weak c6 pawn. That's really the main point in black's play, is that these pawns in combination with this bishop are just really bad. So after b5, I'm more than happy to play the move b4. Just closed up the queen side, the c6 pawn is weak. Now a4, or a5, sorry. And I played a move a3, which is a little bit of an inaccuracy. This actually gives black some open play on the a file, because if black can ever go on the a file, taking here could be potentially dangerous with some kind of pin on the a file. So a better move here would have been a4 after, for example, a takes b, a takes b, b takes c takes b. Rook to a6, for example, I can double up on the a file, and also my rook is coming to d6, or even to b6. This position is completely over. I've sacked a pawn temporary, but these pawns are permanently weak. This bishop is now a monster. The rook is a monster. This would have actually been the cleaner way to play immediately. But after move a3, my opponent played bishop to e8. Now queen to e5. And here, black actually has equality if they play correctly. But my opponent plays somewhat inaccurate here. He plays king to f7. A more accurate way would have been to take off the queen. And here we actually have equality, even though you still have the d6 square. As I mentioned earlier, having these kind of pins along the a file are actually enough counterplay for black to fight for equality. After queen a5, my opponent played king f7, king f2, rook a8, opening up his rook potentially on the a file, so I have to be careful about that. Queen takes on c7, rook takes on c7, and now the only move that gains a small advantage here for white, again the move a4, which I should have played much earlier. It was much better to play it earlier than now. After a takes b4, here a takes b5, rook takes a1, rook takes a1, c takes b. The position is equal in this game. The reason why is because b3 is happening, and after b3 my rook has to leave the a file. Black can claim control over the a file. So for example, let's put it on the board. Let's say that I played king e3. Let's say he played b3, rook has to go to b1, rook a7, rook takes on b3, but now the king can actually start to shuffle over, and yeah, because the rook coming in the back here, it's going to be equal. There's enough counterplay for black here in this position. So here I played king e3, but my opponent didn't play the move b3. He played incorrectly with king e7, and now king d3. And I don't have to leave the a file anymore, because now if the move b3 happens, then king c3, and there's nothing happening here. So this position would be winning. That's why I started to bring the king over. But my opponent found some creative defense here. He played the move e5, and practically it was a nice shot, I guess, because I was starting to be very low on time. And he played this move, and I thought, okay, this is rubbish. It's just a pawn sacrifice. Nothing is going to happen. If I take here, he takes on c5. That might not be too cleanly. I can take with the f pawn, f takes, and I saw a single idea here which I thought was completely winning, but being short on time, I didn't have enough time to calculate different approaches, and I decided to stick with my main idea. So he played bishop to f7, which I thought was a nice idea, going for bishop to c4. If his bishop can reach the c4 square, being on this diagonal might actually give him enough play with some b3 potentially. I thought, okay, this is dangerous, but then I saw a singular idea, which was the move e6, counter sacking a pawn. And if king takes, then d5 check, for example, king e5, then just rook e1 would just be destructive. If king goes back, then I'm forking king and rook, so he can't do that either. So I thought, okay, king takes is not possible. After bishop takes, I have pawn to d5, bishop takes, rook takes on c5, and here I have a bishop for 3 pawns, which I thought, okay, this should be enough compensation. My rook can gobble up the pawns. This should be winning for white. And here I played bishop to f3. A completely losing move, or not a losing move, but this move is 0.0 according to the engine. I have a pawn, or I have a bishop for 3 pawns, but there is too little material left on the board to play for a win. A terrible mistake by me. Really terrible move. As I said, I didn't have enough time to calculate all the way through. I saw this one idea and I decided to just play it immediately. But the correct idea here was either bishop, after bishop takes e6, rook to e1, going for this pin, and after the pin goes, then d5. This position is reached, rook takes on c5, and now king to d4. That's the idea, king to d4, and in the position that I played after bishop to e6, pawn to d5, bishop takes, rook takes on c5, I also had the move king to d4, and king to d4 just completely wins the game because I don't have to go for some kind of passive defense. My bishop is very actively placed now instead of bishop to f3, which is very passively placed. The bishop here on d5 completely guards against these two pawns, and my rook can do whatever it wants, just controlling the king and gobbling on the kingside pawns. And I was afraid of some kind of counterplay with rook to c4, but rook to c4 obviously doesn't work now because my bishop can just chop it off. And this is what I had missed. So after bishop takes on d5, he takes with the rook on c5, and I play bishop to f3. Really just a terrible move here. Yeah, I can't recommend something like this, but of course, because of time pressure, I didn't see the very simple king to d4. A very sad mistake. And now I'm actually just playing for equality here. My opponent plays rook to c3 check. I only have one move, not dropping the bishop, so king to e2, b3, rook b1, king to d6. And here I had realized that my bishop, there's not enough compensation for having the extra piece, and I just have to play for a draw here. So I played g4. I have to make some kind of activity because this bishop is really passive now. I can't get into the game on the queen side because the king is now guarding it. So I have to open up the king side for it to maneuver more, and by doing that I'm trading off my pawns, and with my pawns all my winning chances. So g4, king e5, g takes f, king f4, bishop to d5, so I can activate my bishop now. G takes f, rook, bishop takes on b3, rook to h3, king to bishop to d5, guarding the h1 square, so there's no checks there. Rook takes h4, rook takes b5, king h2 check, king f1, and we agreed on a draw. So the bishop here is very actively placed. I can just give checks to the king, and eventually these two pawns will be traded off for the bishop, and it's just sadly it's a draw. Yeah, I was a little bit bummed about this game because yeah, I definitely felt like in this endgame here I would have already been better. This endgame looked spectacular after king to d3. I knew that I must have been better, but I must admit pawn to e5, a tricky move. Kind of utilizing my time pressure maybe to find creative defenses here. After bishop to f7, pawn e6 was a great move. It was a great find by me, but such a bad mistake that I didn't find king to d3, king to d4 here. Yeah, really a missed opportunity then. But after all, a nice strategic game with this kind of closed Catalan setup, really showing the potential of the squeeze here. And even earlier on, definitely keep in mind in this position. So let's go back a couple of moves to this position after a5. Here the move a4 would have also been very strong, going for this kind of position. But then with more pieces still on the board, going for invasion along the a file. Yeah, a very thematic idea as well in kind of positions like this, securing white a very nice position as well. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys in my next game.